I built in Figma, and with this tool you can do some data visualization stuff within Figma, and it allows you to directly couple data to Figma elements. And this allows for faster iterations than doing it with something like raw graphs or other tools where you go from data to some SVG format, and then you still have to manipulate it in Illustrator or Figma to create the exact styling you want. I can share some of the things I've been building as examples. So the basic structure of Figmata, which is the tool, it's a plugin for Figma, and it's also available for the free version of Figma, so anyone can basically start using it. The idea is that you have a little bit of code, and the code runs whenever you run the code, and it runs in the background. So let's first show some examples of how it could be used, and then we go into making our own chart using Figmata. So this is an example of a very simple line chart. The line is now defined by data that is coming from a source, and I just copy pasted it in here. And the nice thing is that you can run it, and then also if you scale the element, it will scale with it. At the moment, the dots you can move manually. So these are sort of markers that if you want to highlight a certain element or highlight a certain point on the chart, you can then move that circle, and you can see that the day and the value updates based on where it is. So this can help you to sort of highlight certain points in a chart, which is sometimes useful and hard to do in tools like Excel, where you are really fixed in the type of format you have. So this is another example where this is about repair. So people did not attempt to repair because the product was too old or it was too broken to be repaired, for example. And you can style this like it is a native Figma, so you can use the auto layout feature to make the bar chart scale in a certain way. The data is currently stored in the Figmata tool, so also if you would have new data or the data is incorrect, you can update it. And then automatically the chart will update as well. Yeah, and these are all Figma instances. So also you can change the instance, and then it will change the appearance of the chart. Another example is this scatter plot, where we look at television size, so the inch size versus the price. And the brands are now marked by a color. And this is based on a table that is here on the left. So you can also use the tables in Figma as an input instead of putting the data directly in this tool. So it looks at the data table object scatter, which is this table is called scatter. And then it's using that to create this chart. So if I would change the price, for example, so this Hisense television is 679. If I would change that to be 800 and then rerun the tool, you can see that it moves up, and also the marks on the left are indicating the exact pricing. So this is useful for creating scatter plots, and because it's native in Figma, you can also use the instance features. So this is now currently a component that is also in this file. Go to main component. You could, for example, say I want all the dots to be smaller. So let's see if we now scale this element to be smaller. No, it's really small, but you can see that this updates all these elements as well. And you can imagine that sometimes it's nice to have individual components that you want to style in a different way. If you look at the lower end here, it might be that you want to have some items that you left align, or some items that you align in a different way to the dot, so that it becomes more readable in the places where the chart is really occupied. And you can do that and still have it connected to the data. So if the data updates, it will still also be correct. The same you could do with product name cards. So in product or UI design, you might sometimes have like a list of product names, and you want to know that they actually fit the text that you have, or the space that you have for the text. So this is an example where you can use that as well. So this basically contains the database of the supermarket with products. And I'm now looking at a random set of 6 items from there. And they are rendered also on a Figma component. So you can see that they update. And then, you can have some examples and get some idea of how this would look. And you can also do more funky things. So I included D3 within this tool as well. So all the things you see with D3, which is a tool for your JavaScript to write interactive visualizations, you can also do within Figma now. So looking at this sankey diagram, for example, of the energy flow in the UK, you can run it, and it is related to this table on the left. So let's see, if we go from coal reserves to coal, for example, we can change this value, coal reserves to coal, make it 1,000, 200. It will probably now look a bit weird because the input is not matching the output. But you can see here that the coal reserves are a lot. There's a lot going into the coal, but there's not a lot going out. But you can imagine that this is nice for making quick visualizations and also make it look styled like you want it. So again, all these elements are Figma instances of a Figma component. So you could also style them totally differently, and then it would still work. Also, the undo function of Figma is nice, so you can always go back and then rerun it. So you can update the data, or you can update the table. The same with this type of diagrams. Like everything that is possible in D3 should also be possible in this tool. Another thing that I looked into is like, how can you go from charts in Figma to like hand-drawn charts? So these are post-its that are connected together with arrows. How can you use that to then make a table out of that? So get the data from Figma into some kind of tabular format that you can use for other purposes. Now let's look into making our own chart from scratch. So there is several ways to do this. What I think is the easiest way is to start with an example. So what you can do is to install the plugin, you go to manage plugins, and here you look for Figmata. So you probably need to scroll a bit down, but I have it already installed. And then you can run it. And when you run it first time, you get something like this. And there is this button which will create an example bar chart. So let's look at this example. So basically what it did a few things when I pressed this example button. It created the component Figma element bar. And Figma element bar is basically a rectangle component with left name and right the value. And these names of the things are important because they are also used in the code. So it's not super important what is written here, but it's important what the name is here. And quite often these are connected. So if I now change this, it is not connected, which is good. But the first time you open a text, it will be the thing you write. And then if we go into this horizontal bar chart and we look at it, we can see that it is now filled with some default data. So let's go through it. So it has names, so we can also give this our own names or take your own data. And it has values. And the data is now mapped, or it's going over the data array. So for each item in the data array, it will execute this function. And this function will basically update or enter an element. And it will give it the item.name. So it will give it category 1, as you can see here, category 1, category 2, category 3, category 4. And it will set the size to the item.value. So the value here is exactly related to the width you see here. So this width is automatically adjusted by Figmata. So if I would manually change the width of this element, for example, and then rerun it, you would see that it goes back to the default value. The height is set to 17, and the text for these items, so the text of value, so the text of the element that is called value is the item.value, and the text of the child name is set to the item.name. And then these are added to this Figma frame that you selected. It's also removing old elements. So if I now take one of the elements out and rerun it, you can also see that it actually removed these elements. So it updates or adds elements. So it can also, if you add a new element, it will add this to the list. If the name is unique, so it's important. Yeah, so this is basically the basic example. So we can now look into the Figma element bar, for example, and we can do all types of stuff with this, right? Like, so if we want rounded corners, we can do that. You're probably quite familiar with how elements work, but let's make it a bit more explicit. So you can also add elements to this component, and these elements can also be manipulated with the code, of course, but you could also say that I want to have a mark at the beginning and a mark at the end. And now it is important to look at how these elements are actually within or not within the Figma element bar. So if you look at this ellipse, it's now outside of the Figma element bar, but it needs to be inside. And if you put it inside, you can see that it now shows on all the different charts. So the position is now related to the left of this element, but you can also say I want it to the right of this element. And what you can do then is, like, for example, this type of visualization where it's showing the begin and the end mark. And this is how you can sort of play with different types of alignment and different types of visualization. So this value, for example, you could say I want this in the center of my element. And as you can see, if we really put it in the center, and now center align it. It will always be in the center. And another way to do this is say left and right. So now it will force the value to be shown left and right. And we could also replace this value with that value. So if we delete this one now and rerun the plugin, you'll see that this value is now rendered correctly. And we can of course also do the standard things that you would do within Figma. So you can change the color, change the type. So this is all possible. Another thing that is useful is to scale it to the proportions of the element. So with some of these examples, this is already done. So if you would move this one, if you would change the size of this one and then edit it and run it, you would see that the proportions of all the elements changes based on the size of this. And this is done with a linear scale. So let's look into this element, see if we can achieve something similar. So how to do this is to say that within D3 there is something like linear scale, scale linear, and to know the min and the max of the data, we can use a D3 extend, and we need to then look at the value of the data. So a way to do that is to say data.map. What this basically does is, we can look at that actually. So this will give us an array of just the values of this list. And then if we put that in a D3 extend and we print that, we will see that we will get a min and a max value. So it will give us 100 and 600. So we can save that as const min, max is, and then print max. So now we know the maximum value that we see in this list. We can now look into how to scale this. So the range, never really sure if it's the range or the domain, but let's see if this works. So we have a range from 0 to 600, and the domain is then 0.figma frame. And here you see all the things that the Figma frame contains, so that's quite a lot. But we can look at the absolute bounding box and then look at the width. Let's not care about the padding for the layout. And we could say this is then x scale is, and if we now print x scale 600, we would get the so I made a mistake here. This needs to be within brackets as well. And now it returns 4.444. Let's look this and look at what the actual size is of this thing. So probably I messed up the range in the domain, as always. Now it's correct. So you see the domain is where it comes from, and the range is the output of this scale. And what it does is it maps values from 0 to 0 and value that is 600 to the maximum of this absolute bounding box. So if we look at the absolute bounding box, for example, it is 810. Cool. And now we can use this X scale to then change the set size over here. And now it should be scaled in proportion to the element. As you can see, there's no padding now, so it makes it look a bit weird. And we can take care of that by taking this value and do it minus Figma frame dot absolute bounding box dot padding left and minus Figma frame padding right. You can see that it automatically detects all the properties that the Figma frame has, which is quite useful. So it helps me to write it correctly. And now you can see that it is actually scaling correctly in proportion to the data. So this is a basic example of how you can go from basic component, create instances of that component and use that for some type of visualization. Of course, there's a lot more you could do. As you can see over here, there is plenty of examples of how you could use this tool to also make tree maps, for example, but also make Likert scale visualizations, so make more difficult or more advanced bar charts where there's different elements that are all sitting within a auto layout. Yeah, so there is quite some stuff that you could do with this type of plugin. And I'm curious how you could use this and if this is useful for you. So let me know if this is any useful or if there's any features that you would like to have or bugs that needs to be fixed. It's still really work in progress, so don't expect it to be super polished, but I think it could help with doing some basic visualizations and also really connecting it to the data and figuring out these issues before you actually start making the real product. So you can make the visualizations in such a way that it will work with the real data. And it's way more interactive to change the color, or if you want to sort of try to, let's move this up of the bar, you can really quickly experiment and see how things will look, and try out different things, which is nice for early stages of your visualization, because then you can still quickly change it. If you program it within D3 in JavaScript, coding visual elements is always harder than using a tool like Figma, where you have what you see is what you get editor, and you can change basically everything still. Yeah, so let me know if this is useful, and thanks.